The Deathworlders. A story by user Hambone. Chapter 20. Exorcisms. Date point. 4 years, 9 months, 2 weeks, and 6 days after Vancouver. Hierarchy Communications Relay. Session 182625773119. 18.
This is an unmitigated disaster.
4.
I failed to see how. The operation was a failure, yes, but there was no repeat of 6's capture.
18.
84 killed a human child.
84.
And the child would have died anyway had the operation succeeded. You can't possibly be suggesting that the humans would be motivated more by the isolated death of a single juvenile female than they would have been by the destruction of the entire colony.
18.
I am suggesting precisely that.
84.
That is the most abjectly irrational thing I have ever heard.
18.
Then you are not considering how evolution on a death world must affect a species' decision-making process. Consider, you live in a world in which you are surrounded by mortal threats. Which do you prioritize?
84.
The most dangerous one, obviously.
18.
On a class 12, when your available tools are sticks and sharpened rocks,
7.
you prioritize the ones you can actually do something about.
18.
Precisely.
84.
I don't follow.
7.
Consider, anything capable of killing hundreds or thousands of individuals at once is not something that can realistically be defeated with spears and thrown stones. Erupting volcanoes, virulent plagues. The humans have a word. Tsunami.
84.
Harbor wave?
7.
The term refers to several million tons of water, traveling at 200 meters per second.
System log. No activity for 30 seconds. 4.
This is a common phenomenon.
7.
They have killed an average of 7,000 human civilians every year over the last 40 years. This in an era of early warning systems and the resources available to an information age civilization. Do you see the logic? How are creatures barely more intelligent than an animal supposed to deal with a threat like that using primitive tools?
18.
They aren't. And impotently worrying about such events would lead to neuroses and paralysis. But a smaller threat? One that picks off individuals, directly threatening you or your genetic heritage in the form of your children? One that you can gather your spear and fight?
7.
Precisely.
System notification. User unknown has joined. Error. Undefined exception. 25.
Again?
4.
7. I thought you said you fixed this.
7.
No, I said I'm fixing it. The software is a tenth of a galactic rotation old. Identifying exactly why it should start to misbehave now is my priority. Once I know that, patching the issue should be trivial.
25.
How long will that take?
7.
How many terms are there in an equation? It takes as long as it takes.
4.
Prioritize it. 84. You are reassigned to the question of what the discarded are up to. See if you can get in touch with 20.
84.
Yes, 4.
4.
Terminating session.
System error. Error. Redirecting. Subnet mask. Unknown port. Unknown. System notification. Welcome to the Cabal. Unknown.
I think 18 is starting to get it.
Unknown.
Shall we bring him in?
Unknown.
Vote.
System notification. Vote now. System notification. All votes have been cast. The ayes have it. Unknown.
Good. Make it happen.
Unknown.
And 4?
Unknown.
Don't worry about 4.
Unknown.
6 will handle her.
System notification. Session terminated. Date point. 4 years, 9 months, and 3 weeks after Vancouver. Folktha Colony. Cimbrian. The Far Reaches. Gabriel Ares. Dr. Marc Tisdale was a large man, known to regularly deadlift nearly 600 pounds. Gabriel Ares, by contrast, had always been a small man who couldn't have matched that even at his peak. Hampered as he was nowadays by lingering femoral nerve dysfunction as a result of being shot in the lower back, the physical disparity between them was huge. Tisdale's deadlift was nearly triple Ares' body weight. Fortunately for him, Tisdale was, to the core of his soul, a totally non-violent man. But everybody had their limits, and in one sentence, Ares had transformed himself from a sympathetic authority figure doing his best for the sobbing wreckage of a grieving father into the focus of that grieving father's disbelief and anger. No charges. Tisdale stood and leaned forward onto the desk, which creaked. The sentence seemed to wind up around his dropped jaw, taking seconds to finally force its way out. Weakly, as he pointed out the door. He panted. My little girl is dead. His voice broke on the word. And you're saying no fucking charges? He's being shipped back to Earth for questioning. If they decide to charge him there... Fuck you, Ares. I don't want to hear you passing the buck. I want my daughter back. All of that impressive strength failed, and he sagged down, weeping freely all over Gabriel's desk. Oh, just hold, just anything, God! He looked up and speared Gabriel with a gaze that was more a tear-soaked, desperate plea for understanding than it was actually angry. Why? Damn you! There was a professional line that could not be crossed, but not crossing it broke Gabriel's heart right down the middle. Every fear that had erupted in him on the 2 occasions now where Adam had been in harm's way were realized in Tisdale's shaking shoulders. But he could not give in. It was all the Folktha Colonial Police Authority could do to stop the mass of colonists outside from turning into a lynch mob and storming into their flimsy jail to drag the man inside it to his death. The part of his soul where Adam lived wanted to let them. But he knew what they didn't. That poor bastard in the cells was completely innocent. The dilemma before him was how to let Marc Tisdale know that without actually telling him. If Sarah's death proved anything, it was that the hierarchy was as active among humanity and as dangerous as ever. If they would shoot a teenager in cold blood to accomplish their objectives, then any edge, no matter how tiny, had to be carefully shepherded. And that included the certain knowledge of the hierarchy's existence, which meant that he would have to hate himself for the rest of his days for doing this. Dr. Tisdale, he said, feeling his face adopt that cold, blank expression that it had to when he would allow no emotion to reach it. There was nothing he could do about the threat of his own barely restrained tears, and try as he might, he just could not look the man in the eye. You're Sarah's. The accused is... He gave up and started over. You need to know. I understand. Really, I do, Marc. I'm a dad myself. He finally found the strength to look Tisdale in the eye while he said the next. So I know what I'm asking of you by this, but I need you to swear to me that you can take this secret to your grave. Secret? I can't and won't even drop a hint without that solemn promise, Doctor. That's how deadly serious this is. It was a gamble. If Tisdale wanted to, he could walk out of the office, incite the mob, and Gabriel would be in serious danger of swinging alongside the poor puppet in the lockup, assuming they weren't just kicked to a pulp in the street. Fortunately, Tisdale was a peaceful man who was naturally inclined to look for the best in everyone. Gabriel was relying on that. Still, Tisdale thought long and hard about it, and his reply when it came was quiet and defeated. "I have to know, Ares," he said. "If promising something like that will get you to tell me." It was good enough. "Sarah's death is related to other recent incidents. Recent, serious events in which a great many people have died." "Funny," he said, glancing up at the charger's scarf pinned to the wall above his desk to ram the point home. "And to the recall of cybernetic implants issued last month." "That's it? That's all you're giving me is a fucking hint?" "Doctor," Ares said, "I know. But I am talking about an ongoing investigation here that, if it's not handled properly, could mean that Sarah will be only one of the first victims. There are lives at stake here, a great many of them. This is the worst thing I have ever done to a man," he added. "And God willing, someday I'll be able to tell you the whole truth and you'll understand why. But if that day's ever going to come, then this secret needs to stay kept. And a hint is all I can give you. I give it in the hope that an educated man like yourself will be able to decipher it." Tisdale was an intelligent man. He may have been a hopelessly idealistic ultra-liberal with the appearance of a death metal Viking warrior, but he was also a scientist with well-honed powers of deduction. It didn't take him long to mull over the hint. "You're saying there's... Okay, so the implants connect to the brain, so... God, are you talking about some kind of mind control conspiracy?" "I can't say. Is that why you're just going to shuffle this guy off to Earth rather than charge him? Because you think he's under alien mind control?" "I can't say." "You expect me to believe that?" Gabriel choked on his next "I can't say," and instead picked his words with great care. 5 years ago, if somebody had claimed they'd been abducted by little gray aliens, I'd have thought they were crazy, he said. Since then, I've met those little gray aliens myself. He cleared his throat. I really can't say any more than I have, but I promise you, nothing I've said to you has been misleading. Tisdale finally found the strength to stand up, and he advanced around the desk. "Alien mind control," he growled. "Alien fucking mind control! That's what you've got for me!" Gabriel stood his ground and managed to keep himself from shaking, but it was an effort, especially when Tisdale's fist left a dent in the wall by his head. "Give me one good reason why I should believe you, Ares. Go on," he said. His voice was unnervingly level. Gabriel could think of several, but the answer was out of him without conscious thought. "Adam," he said simply. Tisdale blinked at him, then retreated a little. Then there was a blur of motion, and Gabriel was crushed against the huge man's chest in a bear hug, which moments later turned into him trying to support Tisdale's weight as the big scientist broke down crying again. He just hoped that meant that he'd won Tisdale's support. Date point: 4 years, 9 months, 1 week, and 3 days after Vancouver. HMS Caledonia. Cimbrian space. The far reaches. Captain Rajesh Bathini.
Signal from HMS Myrmidon, sir. Captain Manning welcomes us back to Cimbrian space and asks to come along so he can come aboard.
Respond that we did and grant permission. Have the galley prepare a meal for the officers' mess. All senior staff who are able to attend, and, yes, invite some of the Gowan guests as well. Sir? That blight's got bigger, one of the officers said. Look, it's nearly at Folktha now. I'm sure Captain Manning will have a full update for us in due time. Heave to in a stable orbit and throw out our witches. Aye, aye. Date point: 4 years, 9 months, 1 week, and 3 days after Vancouver. HMS Caledonia. Cimbrian space. The far reaches. Guyotin. If there was one thing that Guyotin really liked about humans, it was their approach to food. The meal served to them was a succulent white meat and a kind of piquant red fruit sauce, served alongside crisp orange root vegetables that sent a delightful crunch through his head as he bit them, and delicately scented powdery tubers that glistened with some kind of spiced oil. It was all delicious, and making a show of appreciating the food gave him the excuse he needed to watch the Deathworlders. Bethini seemed to be in a more relaxed mood than at any time he had been over Gorai. He was making inconsequential conversation, enjoying his meal and recounting a humorous interlude from when he had been a midshipman on shore leave for the first time in some place called New Zealand. The concept of paying to mate with a female was a very alien and shocking one to all three of the Gowan males there present. Bethini had not, apparently, ever done so himself, but had been called in to discreetly extract a colleague from a compromising position at an establishment providing exactly that service. The story was crammed with innuendo, but seemed to be going down very well among the Deathworlders, even the female officers, and Guyotin had to admit, himself. Bethini was an engaging storyteller with an excellent sense for comedy that seemed to transcend species barriers. And when it came to the part of having to deliver the crewman to the ship's doctor past a suspicious lieutenant, even the Gowans were chittering along with the human laughter. The story finished, the laughter cleared up, and there was a general looking around, and then, as if prompted, one of the humans, an ensign, if Guyotin had learned to read their rank insignia correctly, stood and raised her glass. All of the others picked theirs up. "To the King, Great Britain, and Earth," she announced. The humans murmured what sounded like agreement and sipped their drinks. "And to our spouses and loved ones," the ensign added. "May they never meet," somebody quipped, prompting general smiles as the drinks were sipped again. This seemed to complete the ritual, and the whole affair relaxed considerably. "So, what news?" Bethini asked of Manning, who looked suddenly more grim. "There's been a murder in the colony," he said. "One of the children." Shock and dismay rippled around the room, though the few officers from Myrmidon seemed to already know the news and just nodded. "There's only a handful of kids down there," McDaniel protested. Manning nodded solemnly. "It's been a huge blow to morale," he said. "When they shipped the guy back to Earth rather than charge him here, a few of the original colonists quit and went home in protest." "Who was it?" Bethini asked. "Sarah Tisdale, 14 years old. Just a girl," somebody muttered emotionally. "God, I never would have expected it here," Bethini said. "Do we know the motive?" "I couldn't tell you," Manning said. Some unspoken communication seemed to pass between the two men, and not for the first time Guyotin wondered if humans weren't a little bit telepathic. Such a thing was supposed to be impossible, but then again, so were sapient Deathworlders. "The cleanup project attracted the help of a billionaire from Earth, one Moses Byron," Manning continued. "He's brought in a lot of his own contractors, invested a lot of his own money. It was one of those contractors who..." He tailed off. "So not one of the first wave, then?" "No." Bethini sighed. "I suppose we were going to bring our shit with us to the stars sooner or later," he mused, unhappily. Manning glanced out of a window. Parked as they were in geosynchronous orbit above Folktha, the creeping brown stain across the continent was clearly visible, and there was definitely a tendril of sickly yellow-green in the waters south of one of the major river estuaries. "In more ways than one," he said. Guyotin was surprised to find himself chiming in. "You can't blame yourselves for that," he said. This attracted the surprised attention of every human at the table, which was enough to flatten his ears in discomfort for a second. "You aren't responsible for the way the universe made you," he said, pressing forward. "That," he pointed at the planet, "is not your fault." Manning nodded. "I suppose naivete and inexperience aren't crimes, but they can get people killed. We need to start being more cautious," he said. "How much more cautious can we be?" Bethini asked. "We fill our ships with biofilter fields we didn't design, use an alien-made medicine that we barely understand to try and regulate our diseases,
It all seems to work, but the fact is that none of the things keeping the rest of the galaxy safe from us are of our own making. Well, what's the alternative? Wrap ourselves up in airtight suits with breathing masks? McDaniel asked.
The alternative is that you kill all of us, Tigral said, putting it so bluntly that the humans blinked, flinched, glanced at each other or shifted in their seats and made some kind of coarse noise in the back of their throats. Tigral. No, Johnathan, they need to understand this. Tigral pressed. He stood up and pointed out at the planet again. Johnathan's right. That is not your fault. It's a lesson, and the galaxy is going to be holding your species to account for how well you learn it. He sat down again. If you aren't willing to take every necessary measure to limit the harm you cause, up to and including sealing yourselves up in containment suits and using medicines and technology you don't understand, then you have no business leaving your homeworld. Manning gave a slow, thoughtful nod. Hear, hear, he said. Date point. 4 years, 9 months, 1 week, and 3 days after Vancouver. Ora Uatun. Planet Aru. Elder Space. Kanadna.
I have to admit, it is a very good disguise. If I didn't have detailed metrics on her calorie intake and the environmental settings in her quarters, it might even fool me.
Kanadna had to agree.
I learned firsthand not to underestimate humans, Lesrie. But you're right. Her cover story is so well researched, and she has so many of those little Gowan mannerisms down, that you'd think she spent years living among those bleeding heart furballs.
Lesrie inclined his head curiously.
First-hand, you say? You've had an encounter with Deathworlders before? She gave him a thin smile. Surely you must have speculated on my reasons for moving from zoology to archaeology, she said. It occurred to me to wonder about that, yes, Lesrie admitted. But I prefer not to speculate ahead of my evidence, and so had made no assumptions. Did you have a bad experience with an escaping Deathworlder? Well, I'm still alive, so I'd say the experience was relatively pleasant, she retorted. Specimen 4 seemed to be genuinely delighted to have been collected for some reason. He described himself as nerding out, whatever that means. Very docile, very compliant. He seemed almost eager to receive detailed and uncomfortable-sounding investigations of his lower gastrointestinal tract. She paused and thought about it. 4 really had been strangely obsessed with the idea of having a probe of some description inserted into his anus. I suspect he was mentally stunted, she added. I can see why you would switch fields. Lesrie agreed. Chilly as their exchange sounded, compared to the usual antagonistic dynamic between 2 Cortai of equal rank working on the same project, Kanadna as its lead researcher, Lesrie having provided the ship funds and hired help, their conversation was positively warm, bordering on the flirtatious. Kanadna was beginning to find that she quite liked Lesrie, and she suspected that the liking was reciprocated. So why are we keeping our Gowan chef's secret? She asked. Surely she would be much better used doing the heavy lifting. Have you tasted what she cooks? Lesrie asked. He delved into a hip satchel and produced a little foil parcel, which, when opened, turned out to contain a number of shriveled, wrinkly, translucent dark pink lumps. Kanadna accepted one and popped it into her mouth. It's familiar, but I can't place it. Muaku grape, Lesrie said. Kanadna expressed surprise. The fruit, an Aru native perennial, was unpalatably tart when freshly picked, and disintegrated into emetic watery mush very swiftly. The sweet spot in the middle, where the grape's disintegrating chemical structure was deliciously piquant, without puckering the mouth, lasted barely a few hours. She takes the freshly picked grape and heats it in an oven for some time at a low temperature, drying it out and preserving it, as you can no doubt taste, at the pinnacle of its palatability. The discovery of this technique alone might be the most valuable thing we find on this expedition. It would turn Muaku into a viable export crop. That was another reason to like Lesrie. His imagination wasn't sadly limited to his field like so many Cortais were. He saw the opportunities. He was right, too. Prestigious and highly paid though this expedition to the Oma Aru homeworld was, neither Kanadna nor Lesrie foresaw discovering anything which might finally shine light into the mystery of elder species decline. The Kortai, as the oldest extant civilization, were doomed to begin their own decline at some point in the next few thousand years, and the Directorate was keen to learn what, if anything, could be done to avert or at least delay that fall. So far, no such expedition had yielded anything useful, and both of them were too experienced and comparatively modest to truly believe that theirs would be the one to stumble upon the great secret. Anything at all which would earn them some money and prestige was therefore welcome. "Ah, yes," she agreed. "I can see now that she would be quite wasted on manual labor, especially when we have the hover pallets and drones to do all the heavy lifting." "Quite so," Lesrie agreed. "And, after all, the other laborers need their exercise." Kanatna was beginning to entertain the idea of exchanging DNA with him. "As you say," she agreed. They left the Gowan cook to her work and strolled away from the camp around their ship, towards the city proper. The planet Aru was a Class 9, baked by the UV-rich output of its star which it orbited closely. The land was largely arid, shading to temperate only very close to the polar oceans, which never cooled enough for ice caps to form. That same heat lashed the planet's wide oceans, giving Aru a regular hydrological cycle. The effect was endless desert, punctuated here and there with rich, sluggish emerald rivers and vast freshwater seas absolutely choked with life. And it was on these waterways that the Oma Aru themselves had, naturally, built their cities during their ancient prehistoric expansion from their evolutionary habitat at the South Pole. Hence the city of Ora'u Uatun, built around a huge oxbow lake where the great 3-kilometer-wide river Uatun had once described a loop with a radius of several miles. It was a city of glass and white stone buildings that made alien eyes ache unless they wore protection. Here and there across the river, great bridges, engineering masterworks that looked far too delicate to even hold up their own weight, and yet were wide, flat, and strong enough for a starship to land on, as indeed Lesrie's History Paradox had done. It was a slightly odd ship, but Kanatna quite liked it. Lesrie had clearly put some thought into the design, reasoning that any archaeological dig effectively boiled down to heavy lifting and meticulous filing, and that the easier the former job was made, the more likely the latter job was to be done properly by the hired labor. The Paradox was therefore built around a cylindrical hold, divided neatly into 6 storage segments around the central column, which housed the largest of the ship's 5 kinetic thrusters. The other 4 were mounted on outriggers, well above the head height of even the tallest species, where they sprouted out of the rest of the ship. The sleeping quarters, galley, recreational room, nanofactory, the hydroponics ring which ran completely around the circumference of the ship, and the bridge blister mounted on top. Landed, each outrigger deployed an elevator to ground level, and the 6 cargo bay doors opened outwards like a flower, meaning that the ship was theoretically stable enough to endure deployment to some of the more atmospherically violent death worlds. Simple enough, but some of the engineering solutions involved in making the configuration both spaceworthy and serviceable by some of the stupider species who would be crewing it had been strokes of genius on Lesrie's part. There was an Oma Aru at the dig site, watching the laborers strip neglected furniture, abandoned electronics, and discarded art pieces out of an apartment building. While Oma Aru had sexes, there was effectively nothing in the way of gender dimorphism for Kanatna to be able to commit to a he or she. Didn't seem to be more than passively curious about the ransacking of its ancient city. It wasn't that they didn't understand. The ones Kanatna had tried to converse with had turned out to be perfectly eloquent and intelligent beings, who knew full well why the expedition had come. They just didn't seem to care. Events simply unfolded around them. And while they watched and understood and could even be drawn into discussion about it, they just shrugged off any possibility of their getting involved. You could literally have stripped the bond-pairing jewelry from their ears, and they would have neither protested nor helped. The 2 Kortai ignored it. The Oma Aru themselves never had anything useful to say. All of the junk being stripped out was just being taken so as to turn a profit on the mission, of course. All of those things would find their way into the hands of private collectors and wealthy fashion hounds. None of it was relevant to Kanatna's research. That was where the books came in. It was a near-universal constant, a trend bucked only by the allobenylin, that every species invented the book, which never again fell entirely out of fashion. Of course, come the information revolution, any given civilization might find that more and more of its literature was being read in a digital format on whatever portable electronics they may invent. But the book never went away. It became a status symbol, a declaration of passion. Books were the physical embodiment of an interest in the archiving of knowledge and fiction, and there wasn't a sapient race in the history of the galaxy that Kanadna knew of that didn't have a hard core of bibliophiles. It was for this reason that there even were books in the building, and every single one had, with meticulous care, been entrusted to the most expensive, precise, and sturdy cargo drone they had. "Things are going well, it seems," Lesrie commented, looking sidelong at her, allowing a subtle hint of amusement to show. Kanadna stopped rubbing her hands together and returned them to a more professional posture at her side. "Yes, quite well," she agreed. She grabbed one of the newest books from the top and glanced at a page, taking in every feature of that page instantly. Her translation implant did the rest, decoding the Oma-Aru written language and converting it into useful concepts, remaining as faithful as possible to the linguistic subtleties it found. "Cookbook," she grunted dismissively, and put the book back. 30 meals to help you keep a nice fat tail." "Look at this one," Lesrie said. "The top 50 holiday destinations in North Uluwaba province." He turned a page. Actually, this mineral mud spa sounds rather good." "An autobiography," Kanadna said, identifying her next one. "Contemporary with the start of the decline, too. Potentially useful." Lesrie was about to reach out for the next book when he paused, tilting his head slightly as if listening to something only he could hear. I think I shall have to leave you to catalogue these on your own," he said. "You would think that simple instructions such as a cataloguing system would be easier to follow for species capable of inventing space travel, wouldn't you?" Kanadna looked up from the book. "Oh, yes. I'll be quite happy here, thank you." She pretended not to notice the admiring way that Lesrie looked at her before he left. Today was shaping up to be a good day. Date point: 4 years, 9 months, 1 week, and 3 days after Vancouver. Starship Sanctuary, Deep Space. Julian at Sicily. "Ice cream? God, I don't remember. I went without it for so long, I guess. Chocolate fudge brownie? Okay, What was the first band you saw live?" "Oh, I've never been to a live show." "What, never?" "Nope. Maybe I should?" Okay. Did you have a pet growing up? I had a hamster called Mr. Mopes." Julian smiled. "Oh yeah, she. He was this huge black dog, like part Labrador, part Doberman, part tank? Mr. Mopes?" "Hamsters sleep a lot, right? But I was 6. I thought he was just sulking, but he sulked all the time. So, yeah, Mr. Mopes." "That's adorable." Allison gave him a playful punch, as she had done every time so far he used a word like cute, sweet, or adorable to describe her, and he was about to ask his next question when they were interrupted by an exclamation of, "Fuck's sake, dude!" Lewis and Amir had taken over the common room couch to play a game of some kind. Superman and Green Arrow were beating the crap out of each other on the screen, with the surprising result that Green Arrow seemed to be winning, much to Amir's dismay. That hadn't been the cause of the outburst, though. The cause of the outburst had been Zane, wandering right across the screen and interrupting Lewis's line of sight long enough for Amir to activate his special move and punch Green Arrow into orbit. Zane just made an unconvincing noise that sounded like, in Somebody Who Cared, it might have been an apology, and vanished in the direction of the galley. "Fuck. That guy's really starting to bug me," Lewis complained. "I hear ya," Julian said. "Guy hasn't said 5 words to me since he came aboard." "You're not missing much," Amir told them. "Every time he talks to me, he's checking up on whether our ETA is miraculously changed. It's the only thing he'll talk about, is finding this shoe person." "Zhu," Allison corrected him. "And yeah, that worries me. You said they only spent like a week on the same station, Lewis?" 8 days total, Lewis said, selecting Wonder Woman for their rematch. She was there. He arrived. She left. He's all like, sue this, sue that. Dude's obsessed. That sounds like trouble, Allison said. Yeah, but what are we going to do? Let the trail go cold? Julian asked. We owe it to her to find her and bring her home, if that means we have to deal with whatever happened between her and Zane. Allison fidgeted with her hands a bit. I guess. He lowered his voice to speak privately with her as the guys started their rematch. What? Just, there are some kinds of trouble that guys will never get into, Julian. They only ever cause it. He frowned. You think... I pray to God not, she interrupted. Can we drop it? It's a subject I don't like talking about. He hesitated, then gave her a little squeeze, watching the game. Favorite superhero? Iron Man, I guess. I don't know. I never really got into comic books, but I like the movies. Hey, you didn't tell me yours. Date point. 4 years, 9 months, 1 week, and 3 days after Vancouver. Folk the Colony, Cimbrian. The Far Reaches. Adam Aries. You were her best friends. I think she'd want you to be involved. I know, and it means a lot to me that you're asking, but you know I'm Catholic, Ava said at last. I'm sure your God would understand, Ava. I guess, but this is Sarah. She taught me so much. I can't lie at her funeral. I can't say words I don't believe. I'm sorry. Haley Tisdale paused. Then she nodded sadly and wiped away a tear. You're right. She wouldn't want that, she agreed. Adam? He sighed. Look, I don't know. I'm not sure I believe in anything anymore, he said at last. So, I'm with Ava. I can't do this stuff here. He tapped the printout they were going over. But I'd like to do this one here, if that's okay. Haley read it and smiled. We were going to give that to Jack, but yes, please. Thanks for asking us, Haley, Ava told her. Really. She hugged them both and let herself out, leaving the pair of them to sit in silence for a bit. Did you mean that? Ava asked. About not believing anymore? It's hard to, Adam confessed. I know, she sighed. I need this to all be happening for a reason, you know? I don't think I could cope if there wasn't a plan behind it all. He hugged her. There's something going on. I know that much, he said. There is? Oh yeah. There's a pattern. Something behind it all. Mr. Johnson back home, now Sarah. It's all connected. I just know it. I think my dad's in on it. Are you going to ask him? She looked up. I mean, I think he'd have told you by now if he could. Yeah, he would have. Adam sighed. But I'm still going to ask him. And if there is something going on, then I'm going to find out what. How? He shrugged. However I have to. Date point. 4 years, 9 months, 1 week, and 5 days after Vancouver. Folk the Colony, Cimbrian, The Far Reaches. Legsy Jones. Intel package for you, sir. Anybody else might have said that Captain Powell's office looked like a bomb had hit it. Legsy, being acutely aware of what exactly bomb damage actually looked like, tended not to use that phrase. But it would have very nearly been accurate. The office doubled as Powell's private space and sleeping area, and it was invariably pristine. On the one occasion that Legsy had seen Powell take his boots off, they had been lined up neatly under his camp bed with the laces tucked inside them. While the captain had once muttered a repetition of the old saw that any unit in battle-ready condition would fail inspection, he nevertheless was a stickler for keeping his own space immaculate. Today was different. The filing cabinet was open. Folders were strewn across the desk. The camp bed's blankets were a bundle at the foot end. The captain's kettlebells and weights were strewn across the floor rather than stacked, and a neglected ration pack on the table had clearly been aborted halfway through preparation. Powell himself was an even worse sight. He looked rumpled. The skin around his eyes had gone dark. The eyes themselves were reddened, and he was sporting a fine crop of reddish and gray whiskers.
"On the desk,"
he grunted, not glancing up from what he was reading. It looked like he was revising literally everything that humanity knew about the hierarchy. That was hardly surprising. The captain had taken the girl's death harder than he let on. One of the obvious symptoms of that was obsession with her killers, though this was by far the worst case that Lexi had ever witnessed. His terse response, however, was troubling. Only long experience of working with him had allowed Lexi to even tell the difference, but while Powell had never exactly been a cuddly personality, he was never usually rude or dismissive with his men. He'd gotten tougher since the girl died, demanding a full and complete inspection of every last detail of the rescue attempt, searching for anything that could have been done better. Nobody wanted to be the one to voice the opinion to him that they'd done as well as humanly possible.
"Where on the desk, Captain?"
he asked, unable to identify any spot that looked like it was more ready to receive the latest report than any other spot did.
"Fucking anywhere. Do I look like I give a shit?"
the captain growled.
"Yes, sir."
Lexi put it down on top of what he hesitantly guessed might be the in pile. Powell didn't react, just turning the page. He only glanced up when Lexi cleared his throat.
"Carry on,"
he snapped.
"Sir, have you slept?"
Lexi ventured.
"I don't see how that's your fucking business, Jones,"
Powell said sharply.
"You're dismissed."
Lexi saluted and turned for the door, deeply troubled, and then decided that he had a duty to perform. He turned back.
"Permission to speak candidly, Captain?"
he asked.
"Pretty fucking sure I dismissed you, Jones. So no, permission denied."
That was a red alert. Oh well, to borrow the motto of a sister unit, who dared, won.
"I don't fucking care, sir. You're gonna fucking listen,"
he announced. The sheer audacity of it snapped the captain out of his revision and earned Lexi a trademark Powell glare.
"Look at this place,"
he said, keeping the momentum up.
"This isn't like you, sir. I've worked with you long enough to see there's something fucking wrong here. You're not yourself."
Powell lurched to his feet, face thunderous.
"Sergeant Jones, if I have to order you out of my office again,"
he began.
"Get yourself to counselling, sir,"
Lexi told him. Powell froze, as shocked as if his subordinate had reached out and slapped him.
"I'm fucking fine,"
he asserted.
"And you are this fucking close to—"
"Psych's a wound like any other," Lexi recited, desperately interrupting him. "You get it seen too, just like you'd get a bullet seen. Your own words." He swallowed, stiffened, and stared hard at the back wall.
"Sir?"
There was a long, dangerous silence. Finally, Powell spoke. He had always been a deep-voiced man. Now the words practically rumbled out of him, as quiet and as full of smoldering danger as the voice of Vesuvius.
"Sergeant Jones, I am ordering you to leave this office immediately. If you do not give me a perfect fucking salute and then fuck off post fucking haste and without another fucking word, it will go fucking badly for you. Am I crystal fucking clear?"
Lexi's salute shook a little rain of dust from the ceiling, and he effected the speediest exit he had ever managed. He just hoped that it would turn out to be worth it. Date point: 4 years, 9 months, and 2 weeks after Vancouver. Folktha Colony, Cimbrian, the far reaches. Guyotin. The central hall of the Faith Center had been cleared out. All the furniture, cushions, books, even the carpet had been rolled up and taken away, leaving behind bare floor which had been marked with an 8-pointed star of some kind. Johnathan and his brothers had elected to lurk in a corner out of the way and watch. Most of the humans seemed to be equally as uninformed as he was to the nature of this ceremony, which he found interesting. There was a lot of milling around and talking in quiet confusion, much of which centered on a small, overweight human female whose age-silvered head fur was long enough to reach her knees, about half of which had been tied back away from her face.
"So, is this their senior mother or something?"
Tigral asked. Gaio indicated not.
"I don't recognize her. I don't recognize her," he said. "Besides, they don't have a clan of females like we do." "Then who—" The question was interrupted by some angry, loud words being spoken on the opposite side of the room, which got louder and angrier as their speaker stormed towards the door, which had just admitted Captain Powell and his team into the room.
"How dare you!"
The speaker was an older man, small and balding and looking positively tiny next to the soldiers, who all glanced at each other in dismay at being so accosted.
"How dare you come here! You failed her!"
He was the very picture of righteous indignation in any species' body language, and the shocked expressions of so many of the other Deathworlders suggested that this accusation was not a widely shared one. But what struck Johnathan was the soldiers' composure. They fidgeted, and some of them looked ready to retort, but all it took was a slight turn of Powell's head to quiet them instantly. Even the silver-haired elder who had been hurrying to soothe out the conflict paused. It was Powell's face that rooted Johnathan to the spot, however. On a human's mobile and subtle features, the total absence of any expression whatsoever communicated volumes.
"You're right,"
Powell said. His voice was deep and soft and emotional.
"We did."
He took a step forward, and the little man backed off.
"Think about what that must feel like, and you'll understand why we're here."
There was a general awkward clearing of throats and shuffling of feet as the soldiers took up a respectful position towards one side of the room, standing in a formal posture with their feet apart and their hands behind their backs. Awkward silence descended again, finally broken by a syncopated drumming from outside the hall that got steadily louder, being joined by the high-pitched voice of some stringed instrument playing a lament. As the musicians crossed the threshold and stood playing on either side of the door, the soldiers snapped their feet together and removed their berets. It was a small coffin, carried by only 4 people, and laid solemnly on the table in the middle of the room as the music came to a gentle stop. "Ladies and gentlemen," the elder began as the bearers retreated to positions around the room, "as you may be aware, Sarah's family have requested that we remember her life in accordance with pagan traditions. There should be nothing in what we are about to do that can cause offense to anyone. But if you would prefer to pay your respects now, after your own fashion, and then wait outside, we will take a few moments of silence for you to do so. I'm sure that Sarah will not mind." A few of those present did exactly that, approaching to touch the box or mutter words. The little man who had accosted the soldiers and a female of similar apparent age, his mate, knelt stiffly and whispered for a little while, before standing and leaving, both weeping openly. Once they had gone, the elder stepped forward again. "Thank you. You'll find the order of the ceremony in the leaflets we handed out, but please do not feel pressured to participate if you don't wish to. As one of Sarah's friends," she nodded to Ava, "put it so eloquently, we don't think that Sarah would want us to lie on her behalf. And so, let us take a few deep breaths to prepare ourselves. Breathe deeply, and remember the love you have for Sarah, and the joy she brought you. And so we begin." She took a deep breath of her own and raised her hands. "Let us call for peace, that in peace the voice of the Spirit may be heard. May there be peace in the east. May there be peace in the south. May there be peace in the west. May there be peace in the north. Reading from the booklet, most of the mourners recited with her, May there be peace throughout all the worlds. The elders turned towards one of the points of the star on the ground. Spirits of the east, powers of air, we call you. Bring us bright memories of our beloved Sarah, and the laughter that surrounded her. Blessed be. As she turned through each of the cardinal directions, invoking in turn fire, water, and earth, Johnathan had to prod to Gull to get him to stop fidgeting, eventually having to deploy a claw to get his brother to really quiet down and start showing some respect. He would be the first to admit that he himself didn't understand what compass directions, air, water, and so on had to do with anything, but whatever was going on, it seemed to be working for the humans. Or at least for most of them. The huge soldier, Legsy, was wiping water off his face every other second, as was almost everybody else in the room. In fact, there were only a pawful of dry eyes in the whole building, and they belonged to the Gowans, unsurprisingly for physical reasons, and to Adam and Ava who simply looked tired. Johnathan had become adept at reading a human's expressive face by now, and weariness seemed the closest approximation he could think of for what theirs were showing. The last dry face was Powell's. His usually inscrutable mask was now a scowl, an expression of the most deep and deadly anger, directed at something that Johnathan was desperately glad he couldn't see, and was infinitely more glad wasn't him. He was so busy watching the captain and speculating about what colossally stupid entity it was that had attracted such depths of ire, that he completely missed the eulogies, and only returned his attention to the ceremony when the priestess started to speak again. O Great Spirit, Mother and Father of us all, we ask for your blessings on this our ceremony of thanksgiving, and honoring and blessing of Sarah. We stand at a gateway now, a gateway that each of us must step through at some time in our lives, and which Sarah has already passed. Her soul is immersed in the shining light of the unity that is the mother and father of us all. The sadness and pain that we feel now is in our knowledge and experience of the fact that we ourselves cannot yet cross that threshold, to be with her until our time has come. We do not weep for our beloved sister, for she is beyond all pain, all fear, and all illusion. We weep instead for ourselves in the pain of our separation. And so, to ease that pain, let us all now spend some time in silence to remember Sarah, to call up in our minds and to speak to her in the private places of our heart, and free ourselves of our burdens, saying to her all those things that we always wanted her to hear. This part was familiar to Johnathan. Silence. He filled it by stepping onto Gull's foot when his brother started fidgeting again. The silence was broken some minute or two later by the priestess, who turned to the younger Ares. Adam. Adam smiled weakly, nodded, and swallowed, then stepped forward, turned to the coffin, and read from the booklet, a little shakily. Did you know it was time to fly? He asked. I didn't want to say goodbye, but we all know this is not the end. Fair. Finally the weariness broke, and he paused, bit on his lower lip, and looked down, squeezing his eyes shut. Alone in the middle of the room, he sobbed once, before finally managing to rally himself and continue. Farewell for now. All right, I gotta stop for today, guys. This first third has been an hour and a half of recording. My legs hurt because I have to sit kind of weird in order... Well, I have a movable boom arm, but like I've also been doing like butt thrusts. I don't know what you call it. Oh boy, that actually is a lot better now, sitting a little bit different. All right, guys, thank you so much for watching. I really do appreciate you, and thanks for sticking it out until the end here. As always, like, comment, subscribe if you would like to, or not. It's really up to you. If you'd like to go to the Patreon, that should be popping up here soon, and or it already has. It's really hard to tell because I never know exactly how long these are going to be because I am just rambling. So, anyway, guys, tell me about the first time that you... tell me about the first time that you realized you were super into something. Like, I mean, like something... not sexual. Okay. So what I mean is tell me about a passion that you discovered. Something that really lit the fire under you to try and get into something that you never had been before. It could be books, it could be sports, it could be philosophy, it could literally be anything, just like a subject essentially that you really got passionate about. I love hearing about people's passions. So this one is mine, by the way, guys. I don't know if you know that, but the recording things and doing these things with my voice, I very much enjoy this. Yes, I also like to be a bit of an asshole, and that is just kind of, I like it. It's fun, you know. You tell people to go shaft themselves, you know, with the feasting, yes, and yes, it's not too bad. But anyway, guys, I love you. I will talk to you all later, and I hope you have a fantastic day. I'll see you in the next one, guys. Bye, y'all. 9/11 was an inside job. Jet fuel can't melt steel beams. I mean, it can soften it to the point where, you know, tons and tons of weight probably make it into a wet noodle and it just, you know, falls apart anyway. Something doesn't have to melt for it to reach an unstable fucking, you know, structural point, but that's regardless. It was an inside job. It was all Bush and Cheney.